Welcome, everybody, to this session in the Festival of Treasury Transformation, which is taking place all week, brought to you by the Association of Corporate Treasurers. You're amongst 2,200 or more people who've registered for the sessions across this week, which, together with those who registered for our International Treasury Week back in May, means that more than 5,500 corporate treasury professionals across the world have been brought together in this digital format to discuss all things treasury. Couple of housekeeping points before we start, if I may. There is a Q&A button on your screen or on your app, which will enable you to place live questions, which we will address if possible during the session. And alongside that is a feedback button, which we would be extremely grateful if you would complete at the end of the session, as it enables us to plan for future digital and then hopefully at some point in the not too distant future, live events. You can follow the events of the week through the app and also on social media, hashtag ACTFTT and at ACT Update, and even occasionally following one or two members of the ACT team, myself at Peter Matza, and others in the ACT. Please do get engaged on that format, and also you can visit treasurers.org for a great deal of other information about this subject and a whole host of others that the ACT brings you and to your colleagues globally. We will be running a poll during the session, but that'll come a little bit later, and you'll be able to answer that through your app as well. The session is being recorded and then will be available to you to listen back to and for your colleagues to listen back to after this session has completed. But please do, if you are not already recommending to your colleagues, get them to register at the moment so they can get access to all the other sessions that have been taking place this week. Today we're going to be talking about Treasury teams and the transformation that has come about not solely through the pandemic, but also that was taking place before that in terms of issues of digital connectivity, location, management, skill and talent within teams that current circumstances are dictating. I have an expert panel with me based in the UK, in the UAE and in Singapore, so that's more of a global nature. And each of those speakers, their bios are available to you on the app, but they will introduce themselves when we answer, or they answer their first question and give you some context of who they are, where they sit within their organizations. So just to remind you, please do let me have your questions during the session and we will try to address them. We hope to make this interactive as the other sessions have been during the week. So to the subject, transforming Treasury teams and their working practices. As we know, the COVID pandemic, has caused a great deal of change in the way Treasury and business in general has had to take place over the past few months. The question really will be is, were the changes taking place before that going to be reinforced, or were themselves changed, and what will the future look like? Perhaps I'll start with Staney in the UAE. Staney, in terms of your experience of working remotely as you do to a large extent, where do you see any changes that have taken place during this pandemic period compared to where you were before? We'll get to the future a little bit later.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Peter, for this opportunity and the ACT team. I represent GE's commercial treasury function, supporting the Middle East, Asia, as well as Africa. This is, I think, the bedrock of our discussion. Clearly, personally, I never expected treasury professionals to be able to working from home. I come from that orthodox school where treasurers need to be in the office, in front of their systems, in front of their terminals. And here we are, 4 months on. Productivity levels from a team perspective have shot through the roof. We've been functioning without missing a beat, totally. So from a treasury perspective, it's the viewpoint of managing the whole scenario at this point of time more from a commercial perspective, more from a liquidity standpoint, and being more close to the businesses from a cash flow perspective is more true than ever.
We'll come back to one or two of those issues a little bit later on. I'm interested in perhaps some of those issues about team dynamics, of course, and you talked there about productivity and so on, but we'll come back to them a little bit later. Marcia, in Singapore, again, I think your experience that working remotely is familiar to you and to your colleagues, but perhaps you'd give us a sense of whether you feel there's been a change or whether or not you have continued on a business as usual process.
Definitely not business as usual. I think all of us can probably relate to the fact that we all struggled in the beginning, how fast the quarantine or stay at home type of situation was just sort of launched on us. I mean, as part of Treasury, I'm used to BCP exercises, but you're usually thinking it's going to last a week, couple of days, right? This was a little bit different. I think at the beginning, we were all struggling. We were all working 12, 14 hours. We did not know how to distinguish between work and home. We were accepting calls, 12 hours and it would be straight, and it was not, it wasn't sustainable. I think the good thing about what happened that was really good in Rio Tinto was that there was such an emphasis on safety and people. And so we did set up sort of a communication escalation process where managers such as myself were able to actually, say that, if we continue this way, this is not sustainable. People are just going to fall off. And a good thing that came out of that was actually upper management, senior management saying, well, you know what, why don't you stop? The tone from the top was really important. It was stop what you don't need to do and put on hold what you don't need to do today. We're all focused on this crisis. So anything that's not related to this, a project that seemed like a nice to be, just put that on hold. And I think that created some sort of sanity around the teams where we could actually, work in a sustainable manner. The other thing that was also good was that there was, Rio Tinto actually asked everybody, if you don't have a desk at home, an ergonomic chair, an extra monitor, we will pay for it, go and get it, because this looks like it's going to be for a long haul. Nobody knew how long it was going to be. Now it's like, what, four months later? It was just not sustainable if you were just sitting on your couch or on your bed. So that was sort of like the reaction, but we did go through a learning curve about how to work from home. And it was a bit painful, but I think now we've stabilized.
I imagine there's probably quite a few people listening to this thinking, how do I get my company to pay for my desk and my new chair and so on? Anyway, we'll come back to that in a moment. Sure. Just before I come to you, Royston, I'd like to set up the poll now as well, because I think now is the appropriate time that we can have a look at this issue. The poll question is asking, how do you feel about team relationships when working remotely? And it's a series of responses to that. Very positive, somewhat positive, about the same, somewhat negative, or very negative. So perhaps those of you participating would answer that poll while Royston makes his remarks. Now, Royston, you're well known in the industry for having led a Treasury transformation, particularly a tech transformation process in what was Wolsey and is now Ferguson. So I'm going to guess that this was all plain sailing for you, and that it didn't matter whether you're working remotely on a couch in London or a couch in Ulaanbaatar. It made no difference. Would that be fair, or do you have some other issues you want to add to that?
I would say yes, the answer is fair. I mean, I can't ignore the fact that we have been very fortunate in terms of the structure we have, in terms of the timing. There have been a number of changes along the way, as you rightly pointed out, in my period at Ferguson, as we are now, that has helped us to kind of address and to navigate through this period, perhaps better than most companies, I would say, because of the technology we've deployed. But it's not been without a number of issues, some issues I'll highlight briefly. Surprisingly, or maybe not, broadband. So as much as the technology we use is through our company's website or network, I should say, and is in the cloud, we are dependent on our local bandwidth, and in terms of the signal that we are able to get locally. And another interesting point that's arisen recently, which I'm not sure how many of your viewers or the panel are aware of, is I'm a great believer of digitalization and automation, and I still am. And in terms of security, clearly two-factor authentication is now becoming the standard for a lot of banks and a lot of portals that you have to log on. But in order to get that two-factor authentication, you have to use a mobile device, as far as I'm aware. Now, believe it or not, there are parts of the country, certainly in the UK, where sometimes the signal is not great, or can be, can fall, can drop. So that could cause a serious issue for companies that, like in this case where we're working from home, and you need to make an urgent payment, or you need to log into the system, and you can't physically do so because you're relying on a signal. So, and I'm sure viewers are well familiar with this. In Treasury, one of the key principles we always look at when we manage risk is to have a contingency plan, because that's important, obviously, it's vital. And so, believe it or not, contingency here would potentially be having a hard token. So that's one example of where, in terms of as much as, nothing's guaranteed, nothing's 100%, but these are sort of challenges that we've had to work our way through. But I echo what Marcia and Staney said in terms of, our company's approach to this whole period. It's definitely been about safety of our staff and mental health, making sure that we are communicating with each other using Teams or Zoom or whatever sort of communication tool your company provides. And the other interesting thing that's come up, I would say, in terms of technology, when you're in the office environment, look, Treasury, I believe, is a people's business. We interact with people. That's our kind of mantra, or sort of main kind of means. But when you're, sort of not restricted, but you're using online tools, email can be sometimes a bit contentious because you're delivering a message that might not be read in the way it should be read or in the spirit it should be read. And sometimes it can be very inefficient as well. So that's, again, we have to find ways, and we have, using Teams, again, by instant messaging rather than sort of doing a formal email. So just those little kind of quirks or nuances that we've had to adapt to.
If I may just add to what Royston mentioned, I think the theme of technology is pretty common amongst what we've mentioned. But one other important element was leadership skills. We were not ready from a leadership perspective to be able to manage the quantum of what we are seeing. So GE, for example, looked at reskilling or bringing out modules for leaders to handle teams in these situations. You no longer could just expect someone, you're calling somebody, you're calling them at home. So you better ask them about how's home, whether they're in the situation to be taking a call. These reskilling elements also played a big role.
I'll come to that. I'll come to that in just a moment. So that's a very, very good point. Just to finish up with you, Royston, it seems to me that what you're saying there is there's definitely a difference between how you're approaching, if you like, the managing the operational technology, the process of doing Treasury.
Yeah.
But also, and I think Staney's alluded to it there, being a treasurer, what that means, both as a leader in the team, but also in relationships with colleagues within the business. Is that would you say that was a fair characterization?
I would, actually, and then just to kind of just confirm to add to that. So operationally, I think we've been very fortunate in terms of, like Staney alluded to earlier, very little impact in terms of business as usual. So we've been very fortunate and sort of very pleased with that. But in terms of dealing with the business, what's been very interesting, and I might bring a smarter face in this, if anyone were to suggest that Treasury is not at the cutting edge in terms of commercial business, well, they would be sadly very wrong, because through this period, we've, if anything, have found Treasury to be at the forefront. And in fact, it's been quite enlightening to be able to have the opportunity to speak to not just our colleagues around the group, which we did anyway, but in more frequency, but with the commercial people that are on the ground. And the reason maybe is the age-old challenge, cash forecasting. Everyone wants to know what your forecast is looking like and how realistic is it. And to get that, we had to have information from the people that are on the ground, people that are looking at the footfall, who are in touch with our customers, who are identifying what the issues were. And actually, finally, to mention on that point, we were also then able to use some of that information to reach out to our banking partners, certainly in the UK, and say to them, look, we've got customers here who have got strong order books, who want to be able to go out and supply the sort of goods and to do this and provide a service to their clients, but they just can't get hold of the cash from the banks. The liquidity was just being bottlenecked somehow, and so now we're been working with one or two of our banking partners to facilitate that. So it's been quite a kind of enlightening experience.
I'd have to agree
I'll come
with you
back
on
just
that.
before you interrupt. Just before you start there, Marcia, I'll come back to that just a moment. I just want to pick up on the poll result here that we've got here, without being too loose with the numbers. It seems to strike me that we're split roughly 2/3 are feeling positive about team relationships when working remotely, but perhaps 1/3 are not. And you touched upon that, Marcia, yourself. So maybe would you like to sort of continue that thought as well about, you were mentioning there about relationships, and Staney was doing it as well, and about management recognizing that. Do you think everybody within the team has bought into that idea, or do you think some people are still thinking, well, yes, but?
These are really difficult situations, and it's still going on until today. I think when it comes to team management and individual engagement, I saw a surge in my work where I was spending a lot of time on one-on-one, doing a lot of weekly mental health check-ins. You can have an absolute superstar, living alone away from family who's going to be, breaking apart, right? Because this is really a personal issue. The COVID really brought in a personal issue. So there was that aspect where you really did have to provide that sort of managerial support and say, we're here to support you. And as soon as you see something that's wrong, you escalate and provide support immediately. It was lucky that there was a lot of, there were a lot of stuff that Rio Tinto actually rolled out, such as the buddy system. I think, Staney, you know this because you had a similar situation where you started to realize, and you don't even appreciate it, that there are people who are like maybe expats here in Singapore, away from their family, alone in their apartment, and suddenly they're stuck for months. Not a thing, you can't even interact. And that is pretty horrible. I think, Staney, you have a similar situation where we started a buddy system in Rio Tinto to make sure that we reached out to these people and made sure that they had someone to talk to. So yeah, that was a really big sort of realization during this thing. But just to get back to Royston, actually, his point about being close to the commercial business, Treasury did sort of step up in the forefront here when the crisis broke out. And in particular, for example, in my team, the role became such that we were working together with the commercial teams. And our main role was to protect the cash flow. Whether you're talking about a customer, whether you're talking about a supplier, you're talking about protecting that cash flow and what sort of mitigating actions can we put in place to protect that cash flow during this crisis, because it's going to impact your customers, it will impact your suppliers and the operations of whether it's your, contact to cash or your P2P processes. So, but I mean, Staney, do you agree with me about that point?
No, spot on. I think, you've mentioned two very relevant points. The first one, in terms of just attention to individuals, like we're based in the UAE. It's a country where you typically just have a lot of expats, a lot of individuals who are very uncertain about what's happening back home. Individuals, who used to come to office with a sense of social environment and who look forward to interacting with others on the floor, today don't have that. So apart from the buddy system has been there in GE, when we bring in a new employee coming in, to refresh that buddy system and to also tag now employees who've been in the organization for long has been a vital component of what we do. However, one other element which needed to kind of be refreshed again was to have specific roles and responsibilities. Look, when you are in a team atmosphere in office, someone picks up something, runs with it. It's another, if it drops, someone else picks it up. In this atmosphere, to have crystallized roles and responsibilities, if not on a a quarterly basis, it needs to be there at least on a monthly basis. We've in my team we talk about it on a weekly basis, actually saying that let's look at what we want to achieve this week, focus on that, and move on. That's been more critical than ever, at this in these times.
Okay.
Yeah. Do we think that the issues of using technology and standardizing technology have translated into that area you were suggesting there of standardizing, if you like, management practice? Because the thought that's going through my mind is, well, that may be helpful in the current situation, but if we do go back to a situation in which there is more human interaction, social interaction in environments, is that going to be a distraction? The people are going to say, well, we've learned to do this now in a slightly different way. Maybe I'm taking a peculiar position there, but I'm just wondering whether or not we've sort of overvalued standardizing and we're slightly undervaluing, and perhaps the poll result would suggest some people are still feeling personally not engaged with the way this process is working.
So Peter, if I could take a stab at that, as GE, we've entered the process of transformation a couple of years before, with our new chairman, Larry, coming in. There was a need for us to work on transforming our company, which was not COVID related. And in that stream of transformation, obviously Treasury also played a big role. One of the important things which we looked to do is to link every GNO which Treasury works on and every system to the larger objectives of the company. Now, what this enabled us to do, and this is again prior to COVID, is if I need to look at a dashboard which somebody in my senior management team requires or an immediate manager requires, it all is produced through systems which, so everybody sees the same window, everybody sees the same picture. So what we do on a day-to-day basis clearly did not have an impact, but I interact with a lot of other corporates in the region who do not have the benefit of launching into this technology roadmap earlier in the day, and today are finding it pretty tough to launch now, especially with budgetary constraints. And those are the corporates, or those are the treasurers who really are feeling an impact on the relationship side of the world, because technology has not been there to aid them. But to your point, it needs to be in parallel, it needs to coexist.
Yeah. Marcia, were you going to add some more to that point?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, people, I think, began, especially my team, and I think cross-functionally, were more appreciative of automation and standardization. So, for example, if I give you, when the tone from the top said, "Let's stop what we don't need. Let's focus on what we need to focus. Let's put on hold what we need to put on hold." There was a real focus on liquidity, and I don't know, Royston, if this is what you were talking about, but where Treasury was looking at cash flows at a 20,000 feet level, because we were so focused and suddenly more engaged with the commercial teams, we're now driving down where we can see cash flows at a 5,000 feet level because we're more engaged. We can see, we're working with the business. We can see that type of insight, and I think that was a good thing. So there was an element of teams being driven to work together because there was a common cause, the crisis, and there is, everybody was worried about liquidity, right? So I don't know if that sounds, if that strikes you as something that you guys experienced as well.
No, absolutely. I think, just to take off from what Marcia you mentioned, the need beyond just looking at, internally and also from a customer standpoint is also to look at counterparty risk and country risk much more. In the past, you would have you would have broad-based policies around these, but now these are in action to look at every transaction to make sure, apart from just doing the cost benefit analysis, to look for a cash flow analysis, look for a counterparty risk analysis, not only from a customer standpoint, but country, bank, and also from a supplier perspective. You don't want to work with a supplier for a long-term project who is potentially going to have liquidity issues. So you're looking at solving for that as well upfront when you're signing up onto a project. So these times hence have been, more eye-opening than ever in terms of the value stream which we bring in all through from customer to supplier.
Royston, maybe I can ask you this question. This is not a TMS session. I did one earlier in the week, but I'm just wondering how you. It would appear just for the moment, somewhat ironically, that having told us about his potential problems with broadband, we've lost Royston to Costa just for the moment. But I'll pick this up with Marcia and Staney. Do you think that Treasury as a whole will be looked at differently because of its ability to adapt in this crisis through its use of technology? What I'm thinking of is that the traditional problem with Treasury management systems and Treasury technology is people say, well, what's the business case? And you're trying to find value in terms of dollars or pounds or euros or yen. But actually what you might be getting onto here, and both you, Marcia, and Staney have alluded to, is that there's a power in the collective of the Treasury team to bring more of the discipline of financial management, financial risk management in particular, to the business, which perhaps might not have been there before. Do you think that's going to be better understood?
Do you want me to take that, Staney, first? Okay, I'm certainly hoping that the credibility and the value of Treasury will be more transparent, and it always does in any crisis. And certainly some of the solutions that we've come up with, whether it's to mitigate, perhaps risk to cash flows, whether it's on the sales side or on the supply side, there is now an appreciation. So when, let's say, Staney's talking about, we're now looking at, suppliers, I'm presuming it's your procurement reaching out to you, talking to you and asking for your advice. So you almost want to set that sort of standard where they're almost going to think about Treasury when they didn't think about them before. And suddenly now this crisis brings it to light that, when I'm looking at this contract, when I'm looking at, the terms, et cetera, the impact on cash flow, let me bring in Treasury for their advice and ask them, what are the risks and how do we mitigate it? Because this is the world we're going to live in. I think this is the new normal where it is going to be a very volatile market, and crisis like this will be probably normal in the future. So yes, I do hope that Treasury's value is being appreciated and seen, and then they have a place on the table in the future.
Staney, what's your view?
So if to add to this, in G, we've been lucky, we've always been the backbone to the organization. So I would, it's not that, suddenly the organization now looks at the Treasury function and says that, look, wow, these guys add value. That's always been there. So that's number one. However, the view that the Treasury organization can be linked far better into, say, the commercial side of it, the value which you bring end to end is far more seen today than ever. To take what Marcia mentioned to the next level as well is purely from a BCP perspective and from a liquidity standpoint. Treasury has always been there managing that side of the world, but to look at also where do we source our supplies from to be able to get financing for the right product has been an important element which we've been looking to support throughout.
Do you think that's going to change the way in which you and your colleagues and your management look at the types of people they're going to expect to be working as treasurers and in Treasury, and that perhaps old school like myself, who may have come up from the cash management, foreign exchange, traditional liquidity management, Treasury, into more risk management, but that's going to be the wrong place to start. And now people are going to say, well, no, what we need are people who are collaborative, who understand the wider business world, who can interact better with both their colleagues, both in terms of executive, but also line management within their businesses. Do you think that dynamic is going to change? First question. And if it does, what does that mean in terms of people and talent and skills and development? Just a couple of small questions there for you to answer, the pair of you. Okay. I'll pick up with you, Royston, in just a moment.
Sure.
Let me pursue that question with Staney and Marcia for the moment. Do you think that's going to fundamentally change who we are or who we will be as treasurers?
Look, the basics. Yeah. Sorry, Marcia.
Go ahead, Staney. Go ahead.
Okay. So the basic fundamental points in terms of the skill sets which you bring as a treasurer to what Peter you mentioned are always going to be valued. These are fundamental skill sets which treasury professionals should bring to the table. I think in addition to this, in this atmosphere where we are not sitting face to face, most of our calls which we're doing in the organization as well, you're not putting the video on, you want to conserve bandwidth. So the need to be far more collaborative and not work as an island is going to be paramount. So when I'm going to be looking at a skill set we would want to bring onto the team, collaboration is going to be one paramount skill. Beyond that, having a technological background or some level of technical expertise to be comfortable with the plethora of systems which we use, to be comfortable in working in this sort of a tech atmosphere is going to be a very important skill set for treasurers or emerging professionals who want to come into the treasury vertical.
No, I agree with you.
I'll bring you in just a moment, Royston, but Marcia, what's your view on this question?
I think treasury, so on one hand, you need the technical skills. You still need to understand cash management. You still need to understand risk management, FX, interest rates. You need to know the foundational knowledge about, treasury and what treasury's value is. But from being more operational, from being more compliance, right? I think treasury today can actually take that jump in being more strategic and driving, let's say, best in class. The biggest change today in the world is, for example, our payment system, right? The way we move money around is going to change tremendously. We don't even have a year or two to adjust to it. It's just going to keep changing because of technology. And this is where the treasury person or treasury expert can actually sit there and guide the business, because it actually will impact the way we handle our cash flows, whether on the customer side or the supply side. The banking system is going to change. Regulations are going to change. And I think treasurers right now really need more leadership skills, because a lot of it is going to be pitching what's going to happen in the future and convincing people this is what we have to do today to be ready. And if we're going to wait another 2 years, we're going to be so behind the curve. And so it's more of the leadership skill and the ability to pitch that, right, credibly to the business is where I think treasury professionals should actually go to.
Okay. Royston, you didn't miss much during your brief intermission. The conversation has moved towards looking at the types of individuals, the types of newer working practices in terms of collaboration and relationships and skills and talent and so on within Treasury. Having been through your tech transformation process, did that change the way you and your management and your colleagues looked at the people who ought to be treasurers, or how treasurers ought to behave and act? What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, actually, apologies for that slight intermission. I had issues with technology, believe it or not. But no, I echo basically what Marcia and Staney have said. And I think the simple answer to your question, Peter, is that, look, I am a firm believer that Treasury, in terms of the fundamental, like Marcia alludes to, technical requirements are still the same. In fact, vital. You have to understand the basics. You have to be able to know what you're working with, because even more so in today's environment, where if you're going to automate a process, we don't want to be in a situation where we've automated everything in a box and don't have a clue how it works or why it's been done in the first place. So that's one point I'd make. The other point I make in terms of skill set, I think what's critical for us, apart from the leadership that everyone's mentioned, is the whole point about the fact of being adaptable. Because clearly we're going through this change, this transformation period. And ironically, I was interviewed, I think about a year ago for a magazine or an article where it asked, what do you see Treasury of the future being like? And I, like everyone else, was thinking, look, we are heading only one way, which is like a virtual online Treasury. And ironically, we're there. So I think that what's happened in the spirit today in this COVID-19 impact is that process has been accelerated. And along with that process brings all of those other factors into play, the leadership, the adaptability, the appetite for technology and engaging with it for good. And of course, let's forget the whole risk side of things with cyber security and what have you.
It reminds me of one of my favorite New Yorker cartoons. Somebody walks into what looks like a very busy and crowded office and says at the top of their voice, "Does anybody know where we keep the unwritten rules?" Which slightly goes towards your point there, Royston. I didn't ask you as well about the poll result, Royston, and how you felt about this, which showing roughly getting on towards 2/3 suggesting they're feeling reasonably positive or okay about the working remotely, but there's up to 1/3 who are not feeling okay. Would you, perhaps it is speculation, but would you speculate on what you might think would lie behind that, or how you might address it, for example, if it was an issue you were facing?
Yes, I think what this has highlighted, Spirit, is it's highlighted the classic areas of Treasury where there are clearly parts of Treasury that have adapted quite easily. Dare I say, we could talk about the back office to some degree, the middle office, potentially those processes, much easier to automate, much easier to kind of manage from a remote perspective. Signatories can be an issue in some cases, but let's assume that broadly that can still, and that was achievable. And it does vary actually, depending on the company. So if you look at the banks, and I know we're talking about banks per se, but they have had a particular challenge with the front office because a lot of their systems are based in the office. And so to get to those, they've had to force, some people have had to go in. But I can imagine that if you've been used to working in an office in terms of Treasury and interacting with your colleagues from finance or whichever team you interact with, and there could be a level of paper involved, not completely automated, not completely digitized. What do you do when you're working from home? What do you do if you're faced with a control that says you have to provide something in writing or signed by a particular signatory who's not going to be able to do that literally? And that's the bit where the leadership skills come in, and that's the whole point about transformation, is trying to adapt to make sure that you can, you have a process to deal with that. So I can see why 1/3 would feel a bit uncomfortable. And let's not forget the social element as well. There are bound to be people that are just not used to working from home. Maybe they haven't got an office potentially, or they have other circumstances. It's a whole kind of gambit. So yes, that sounds quite reasonable.
And how has this and your transformation, how do you think, in answering the question, or perhaps you didn't when you were asked by that magazine, not so much what the Treasury itself would look like, but the people within it? What do you see as the changes in those individuals? And do you think working remotely, if it changes the dynamic of the relationship, do we lose more than we gain?
Not necessarily. So let me answer that first part of the question, which is I said that I saw the people and the roles in Treasury still continuing. I see the systems and the processes changing and being automated. Because look at our team, we're 4 people in Treasury, and I think a lot of corporates do have that sort of number. There can be some larger ones, more than that, but generally Treasury has always been quite small. So the technology would change for sure, I think you're right. In terms of the interaction, I think there's definitely going to be a requirement for treasurers to be more agile, to be more accepting of the new technologies that are coming across, AI, RPA, all that good stuff. And there is definitely going to be a requirement for treasurers and their teams to be able to communicate digitally with their colleagues around the group, as we have been doing and will continue to do. And I think that's a skill set you need to have as well, because sometimes when you're not in front of the person, as you know, when we deal with banks or in Treasury, you need to have that sense of trust. That person you're dealing with is got the integrity. And I'm not suggesting that we don't work with people like that already, but do you know what I mean? You want to be sure that when you've agreed and you've communicated something across the colleague in Treasury, that's been taken and understood in the right spirit and correctly.
Just before I go back to Marcia and Staney, do you think that's also in the wider context of the peer group of treasurers within their organizations, do you think that's also something that's going to affect their working practices, whether it's your finance colleagues in, I don't know, in tax or in accounting, or it might have impact on legal services or and so on? So do you still think that the technology will change the world, but the people will persist?
I think the people will persist, but the technology will change. And I think that's really the direction that everybody has to go to. Otherwise, you're going to be left behind, right? And I agree completely with Royston. For some people, it is really difficult when you're used to face-to-face and suddenly you're doing a virtual meeting. And my experience was I was completely not in sync with my team when this whole thing started, only realizing later on that I was so dependent on nuances because I'm used to face-to-face. So there are nuanced signals when you know someone's not pleased, someone's happy, someone agrees with you. And I didn't realize that until later on that I did not pick up on that. So there was this miscommunication. And I think we're all adapting to that. And I think the solution to that is just to be really open to it. In my case, I actually told my team, I can't see your body language anymore. So if you're not pleased with something, could you please just say it? Because I'm not going to be able to pick up those nuances anymore. So
do you think it might be possible that those folks in the poll who are feeling negative about it, the negativity is not about, if you like, the job, it's about those interactions?
Probably. It'll be interesting to actually, if you do a survey and just ask them, what is it, in like one word, right? What is it that doesn't make you happy about the interaction? And it could be that, because in Asia, for example, or anywhere else, the moment you've got a video conference at work, it's usually like a little bit formal. It's not one of those face-to-face things. So in the beginning, everybody was still kind of formal, watching out how their facial expression. I'm hoping that, maybe they're moving towards people who are making them a little bit more comfortable in a virtual conference like this, rather than, being starch and rigid about it. It could be that, and maybe the communication is, not as engaging as when you're face-to-face. So that's a challenge for a lot of managers. How do they actually make people feel a little bit more comfortable? So,
Peter, I can just inject, sorry, Marcia, just to give an example, what we did in Ferguson, our tax team came up with the idea very shortly after the COVID-19 impact to try and encourage us to interact with other, a bit more socially. They started a little 8-ball pool league, if you like, on an app on your mobile phone, and that was just tax and treasury, to be fair, because we can kind of go the whole company. But that was really quite good because it facilitated people talking to each other. Actually, to tell a lie, we had it for the whole office, not just tax and treasury. It was the whole office, and so we had these social interactions purely to play the game, which took no more than 5 or 10 minutes.
Exactly.
And that's quite a good idea. And then we had quizzes and so on and so forth along the way. So
yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Eight's a good number. I can count to 8. That would help me. Staney, I have an interesting question here, and obviously Marcia and Royston, you comment afterwards. Very interesting one. Is it possible that remote working would stifle innovation? and is there a danger that Treasury becomes isolated again from the rest of the business? The innovation there the question doesn't say whether they're talking about innovation in individuals or they're talking about innovation within process or innovation in technology. So you can answer it any way you like. But is there an issue? And it was put, and I certainly in one of the other sessions during International Treasury Week, that although, and you mentioned this very early on about productivity and response and so on, that's because this is relatively new. If we're doing this in 6 more months' time, is that going to be the case? And are we going to regress rather than continue to adapt to the challenge?
No, it's a very prevalent question, and it is at the thought of our minds in Treasury as well within the organization. That first is, how much breathing space do you really have at this point of time in terms of investment to be able to innovate? I think that's one underlying theme. Now, presuming that that's not an issue, collaboration has always gone hand in hand with innovation. If you've got to work on something, it's got to be a multifaceted option. It's got to be a stream which runs across the organization or involves different parts of the organization. In these times, when you're not sitting with each other, would that have an impact? Yes, but we need to look at building incubators or building forums to be able to still continue having that dialogue and challenge status quo. One cannot live thinking about this option which we're working on, but this is just going to go away. In the month of May, we said by the end of May, then by the end of June, by the end of July, the faster we accept that this is or this may be a reality for quite some time, and bring on these ideas on what can we innovate, what can we look on. For example, as GE, we are driving the theme of lean throughout the organization. This is not restricted to Treasury, but throughout our manufacturing process, throughout our communications process. We're looking at standard work, looking at standard processes and eliminating waste. Now, this is not kept at the back burner, saying that, look, now they were working from home, let's focus on day-to-day business from a sustainability standpoint, but we're constantly pushing the boundaries to see how best can we innovate. We are continuously talking about options like blockchain, digitization, because these options, which have always been there at the background, and we've questioned, do they really add value to us? In these times, and especially in the future, they are going to be much more prevalent. So might as well hook onto that bandwagon now than be in a regrettable stage later. So innovation, yes, is here to stay.
Okay, Royston, what's your view?
Actually, ironic, at first I thought maybe yes, I can see why innovation potentially might be stifled if you're working from home in terms of the interaction you have. But I've kind of thought that, thinking that through, I think actually it's the opposite. If anything, this is exactly the environment that we've been required to innovate. A simple reason, and as Staney gave some great examples, the examples I'd give is look at the banks, KYC. They've had to innovate. They've had to go digital and accept DocuSign, Adobe Sign if they weren't already. The way we interact with our internal stakeholders, we've digitized signatories. We are paperless anyway. And then if you look at your processes, and I think that has always been a critical area for me in Treasury as much as any other area, it's through times like this that they become even more important, if you like, or critical, because the simple reason, A, you want to make sure that you're not making life unnecessarily difficult. And so by digitizing wherever you can or automating where you can, that's going to help. But more importantly, from a security perspective, like every other company, we have controls. We've been through the transformation process of establishing not just our policy, Treasury policy and procedures, but ensuring that there's controls within Treasury, within the group that are adhered to and are clear. And they test those on a regular basis. So that for me is, like Stanley was mentioned earlier, the bedrock for how we can then evolve and develop and innovate. Because as long as we stay true to those processes, we should be in a good place.
Marcia, it's an interesting point that is raised there, just as a side issue about if you like, people feeling secure in this type of work environment where they're not used to it. I'm not sure if it was you or Staney or Royston mentioned earlier on about, some banks having processes that they have to run from centralized locations, shall we say, rather than sort of working from home or remote locations. Have you found any issues in terms of, you talked as well about payments, for example, have you found any issues in terms of heightened security issues or cyber issues or other problems that you've had to stop for a minute and think, well, actually that could be harder than we want it to be?
It's almost like you're reading my mind here, Peter, because that was the point I was going to bring up with relation to technology. I think if you don't digitalize, if you don't automate, you don't have a choice. You have to, right? If you're still doing manual processes, workarounds, and there's a lot of exceptions around your process, that's not going to be a choice in the future. You're talking about cybersecurity. You're talking about, and they're getting smarter and smarter and smarter. You're not going to survive. You're going to have payment fraud, all sorts of fraud around. And so there is no choice but actually to automate and digitalize and try to get rid of the manual processes, the workarounds as much as possible. And I think, today, these things are coming to a point where, companies do not have a choice but to move forward with automation and digitalization.
That brings me back to a point I raised with Staney, which he certainly answered, but maybe you'd have a view on this. Does that change the relationship, if you like, that the treasurer and the Treasury team will have in terms of persuading their management about investment, and that it's not solely about saving a basis point on the money market fund portal or the foreign exchange trading portal or whatever, but it's a rather more fundamental health of the organization issue, a really true Treasury stewardship issue?
Yeah.
Do you think it is? Royston, do you think that's somewhere where there's value to be gained, particularly for people who are not quite on this, on the journey that you've been through?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I definitely have some views there. So the way I approach any technology or system implementation is, look, in this case, you want to automate, let's say, that's a goal. And in order to get to that, to achieve that goal, I think you need to bear two main stakeholders amongst many in the organization. For me, for us in Ferguson, it's been internal audit and your IT function. And the reason I say that is because, those two departments will help to validate your business case, for sure. If you can demonstrate that you're going to obtain synergies and improve control in your process and from the system you're using, and that the system itself is secure, validated by your IT department, 99% of the time you'll get that through your CFO, because apart from the actual value that it gives to you in Treasury. So that for me has been the game changer in terms of more recent times where we've successfully put through business cases for the systems we've implemented. And I think it goes without saying that these systems aren't just for now. They should be implemented with the view of how you're going to continue developing and evolving those systems to add more benefit to not just your team, but to the wider teams within your organization, not just in the office, but in terms of the group.
Just to play a devil's advocate here to this specific point, and I mentioned this earlier, I've interacted with other treasurers who have not yet kickstarted their journey of digitization and are struggling at this point of time. Investment to come, to be brought in this area at this point of time from a cost perspective is almost negligible, next to impossible. One of the suggestions, which could be possible for such corporates is to dig deep with your banking partners. Try to understand what solutions they have on the table. For example, many of our banks already have multi-bank visibility platforms. You don't need to make an investment within your organization to spend for that, but it's about enabling and using a platform which is already available. So the soul searching with your existing partners or redefining your existing partners to enable this digital journey or the kickoff of this digital journey is the right step. Once you take that initial step, then convincing people within the organization on bringing in further spends may just be an easier task.
Well, can I just quickly add, Peter, to what
Royston.
Stanley's point? This period that we've just had has been a fantastic opportunity should those companies wish to embark seriously on a journey of automation, where some companies, some vendors have been offering their software for free.
True.
So use that as an opportunity, I would say.
Yeah, during the TMS session I ran on Monday, it was quite interesting. We did a poll on that, and roughly a half to 2/3 of people were either pushing ahead with plans for Treasury technology or at least investigating it further. And it's usually about this point in a session where I say, if people think the price of success is expensive, they should try the price of failure and see how they like that. But it all still goes back to that point that the treasurer and the Treasury team has got to be able to communicate now in language that is relevant to the circumstances that they're in. And again, rather than just saying, well, we can save a basis point here or a basis point there, which generally speaking, you could save by eliminating a couple of rounds of paper or something without being too dismissive. But I think it does raise a bigger picture. Well, we're certainly coming towards the end of the session. It's been fascinating so far. So thank you very much for your contributions. I just want to close with my crystal ball question, which I know you've not been aware of and not been able to. If there's one particular lesson that you would like to learn or you think is useful to learn from the current crisis that you'll take into your working practice going forward, what would that be? Anybody can go first.
Yeah, let me bite the bait there. I would say don't hesitate being that closest mentor and the biggest critic for your CFO. At this point of time, that's the need for every organization with regard to the treasurer role. That's one thing which I would take away from the situation we are in, because if we don't play that role at this point of time, we are not being true to the profession we run in.
Thank you very much, Staney. Marcia, what's your one real learning experience?
I think it's if there's one thing I really appreciated is focusing on people during this time, because there was a tendency to focus on just delivery as if it was business as usual. While, actually you couldn't deliver if you did not focus on people, their safety and their well-being. I think that's really, really critical. And that was a really good lesson for me to learn through COVID. It's all about people.
Thank you very much. And Royston, what are you going to take away from it, apart from the fact that probably you can or you can't play 8-ball pool?
No, as much as I love technology, I can't, sort of deter from the fact that, like Marcia and Stanley alludes to, it's about the people, right? So it's our teams, it's our colleagues. How do we interact with them? But more importantly as well, or just as important, I should say, is the experience I've had of communicating with those people, dare I say, on the ground, the people that are kind of got their finger on the pulse, and how important that is to us in Treasury when we're looking at forecasting. And I know it's not just about the business. I do genuinely mean this. It's about having that sort of informal discussion, as we did quite often when we had our calls about, sort of the price of bread or, the state of the economy in the US. But it actually brings in other facets that you wouldn't normally get a chance to talk about. So I think that has been a great learning experience for me.
Well, thank you very much, Royston, Staney, as always, and Marcia as well. Thank you, all of those of you out there in the digital world listening and participating. Thank you for your questions and your poll responses. Just a brief reminder, the Festival of Treasury Transformation continues today and tomorrow, and of course you can look back and listen back to the sessions that have taken place over the previous couple of days as well. You can follow on social media, hashtag ACTFTT. You can obviously find more information about the ACT, what we do in terms of education and qualifications and so on, at treasurers.org. So it just remains for me to thank again my speakers, to thank you as participants, to thank everybody out there in the digital world for participating. Thank you and good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.